July 2026 was an awesome month for a couple reasons. So, first off, we hit, the 5,000 download from Buzzsprout, which was amazing to kind of hit. And not that it's about the, downloads, right? I'm learning that social media and downloads and podcasting have two different kind of like metrics and levels. But it just shows that, I love just continuing to think about why I'm doing this podcast. And, today as I share, my reflection on July 2026 guests on the show, I'm really starting to hone in more and more on what should work feel like, right? I think that's why I started this podcast, right? Work sucks, but I like it. So then how should work be? What should it feel like? What should we be thinking about when we're, doing a project that is good and has parts that suck? And the other thing that was also amazing in July was that we celebrated the 1 year mark. And so I started this podcast July, believe it's the 15th of 2025. And before that, I never knew what a podcast was. So here we are. We made it 1 year and over 5,000 downloads and actually coming in on close to 100 episodes already. So super excited. Thanks for being here. Let's jump right into be inspired by many, but influenced by few. So the kickoff the month of July was pretty awesome. It was Wisdom. I was on a couple of his podcasts. And, I said, hey, man, you got to come on my podcast because what you're doing, the work that you're doing is amazing. And we talked about podcasting, and we both sort of agreed that the podcasting medium, the podcasting space is so great because it allows people to be themselves, right? We have so many things that are just AI generated. I was scrolling on LinkedIn and I just see all these like ads coming up and events of like, you can tell they're AI generated and it puts me off. I'm not going to lie. Like it looks like it's like you don't care. And I know that's not what they mean. That's not their intent, but it's just like, where is that sort of human element, that human sort of spirit within the work? I think it's becoming too sort of digital, too transactional. And Wisdom and I were just going off that, we're just sharing behind the scenes of what it takes, right, to do a podcast, the amount of hours, right, that we spend, prior to and after. Now, right, one thing I want to say that with a podcast, it's like anything, right, where the more you do it, the more efficient you become. But when you first get going, there's a lot of things that you have to learn, the different platforms. The other day I was recording and I forgot to hit one little button and it kind of screwed up, the way it recorded on the other side. And fortunately, I have a platform like Riverside that can help me out when I make those kind of dumb mistakes. But Wisdom was just an awesome, guest because he reminded me too that we don't have to be perfect, right? We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to have all the solutions. We just need to keep showing up. And I think that's just a story anyone could really just resonate with. And then we moved to Shiloh Creed. And, basically what was cool about her, right? She was an author as well, mostly fiction. Even though, I don't read a lot of fiction, but I can still appreciate, right, the whole act, the whole process of writing a book. And what was so fascinating was that, at one point she loved writing, and not that she doesn't now, but she even admitted like, oh yeah, now I'm getting fixated on sort of the business. It's becoming that transactional thing again, right? And it was kind of fun to see on the show for her to kind of let loose of that, oh, I have to, sell so many books and hit my deadlines and da da da. And those are important, right? Those are important metrics. I'm not saying just go off into the world and do whatever you want, right? We have to have some sort of rules and guidelines to kind of steer our vessels around. But, she's kind of learning, discovering. She even admitted she had multiple pen names, right? To just get her work out there. And I just found that very interesting, because I talk a lot about on the show that your identity is, who you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing, right? If you're an engineer, if you're a mother, a father, a golfer, excuse me, or whatever it may be, right? There's the part that sucks right there, clearing my throat. And I guess what was really, the end of the day, what she was trying to kind of share, trying to convey is that regardless of the, whatever name you want to call yourself, when you're publishing your work or doing your work, it's really the idea of storytelling. And I know that it's come up, a lot for me, as I try to market my upcoming book, In a Rush to Go Nowhere, Finding Shavasana. And it's all about this idea of storytelling because people, yes, they want to see the results. They want to, learn that you sold millions of copies. But let's face it, that's like looking at an Olympic athlete and being like, okay, yay, they made it. I see it. They're on TV. But what did they do? Right. So Shyla was kind of breaking down the behind the scenes of what she actually did, and I really liked how her best writing, right, was in the car. I don't know how I could ever do that, but I just, things like that, right? Those are the elements that I love to hear from guests on the show that that's what makes up their work. It's the things that we don't always see. We see the published book, we see the finished product, we see them smiling at the finish line. But this show is all about, again, what does work feel like? What should it feel like in all moments, right? At the beginning, the middle, and the end. Talk about this next guest, right? So Eric Robinson, he was a pastor and then became an FBI agent. Now, that in itself, that's incredible. He's got a book coming out. That's why he's been podcasting so much. I signed up to be on his subscriber list to check it out when his book debuts. And I guess like all I could think of was, you know, I guess I had a lot of different thoughts, but the first one that comes to mind is that he did the pastor work to kind of see the good in people. I don't think he really framed it this way. We're on the show, but I was reflecting on it after. And, he wanted to see sort of the level of how in which people that could be good in the world. And then he was like, okay, now that I have this baseline, this sort of foundation, let me go be the guy that enforces it, right? Not that, and a pastor kind of does that in their own way, right? The people come in and, they share the Bible and these things, to the people to inspire them to act in good ways, to act in ways to be, fulfilled, to live a good life, to do good to others. And then as an FBI agent, that's like kind of what he's doing too, right? But he's like, oh, you've had your chance now. Now the law's kicked in and we got to do something about you because you can't be doing this. And I like how he said it, right? You have to humanize even these offenders, right? You know that, it might have struck a nerve that they did something that's really against your values. Maybe they were, whatever, I hate to say, just kind of like sexual abusers. And you have to say, well, they're humans. And what it made me think, not that it makes it right, but what I'm going with this point is that in How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, he indicates that the opening chapter, right, that people, Al Capone and these robbers, gangsters are always quick to blame everyone but themselves. And the whole trick of being able to influence people to do the work that we need to do is to see them for who they are, right? If we were in Al Capone's shoes, we would obviously be him because we were subjected to all the stimuli. So Erica sort of reminded me that when he was confronting people walking into, his church, or he was breaking into an apartment or whatever to break up this bust, he saw people for who they were, right? Now, obviously, people in those different contexts have different values, different things that led them to that point. But the thing to take away is that see people for who they are. And then talk about seeing people for who they are. Then we had Russell Van Brocklin, and he works with students who really struggle in traditional classrooms. And he indicates that they're not lacking, this intelligence if they have, dyslexia. It's that they really need different approaches. And it's about focusing on the strengths and not necessarily the weaknesses. Now, I mean, that in itself, that's it right there, folks. I mean, we always talk about, especially in manufacturing, that, oh, you did, it's 5% scrap. Well, what about the 95% we did right? Our culture is so loaded with looking at things from a negative perspective, from a perspective of, well, you're weak, get stronger. That's how we be better, right? Work on your weaknesses. Take a strengths finder test and work on your weaknesses. And yes, there's an element to when you want to be your best that you have to assess the things that might be holding you back. But I don't think so much at the cost of, remembering what made you strong in the first place. And I think that needs to come to the forefront more than ever. And what he talks about as he works with kids, it's exactly that. He's tapping into the basic things that they do very well, right? If you're very, attention to detail. He talked about one thing with, the taking a word and defining it. And just that kind of level of detail for a person like that is going to help them build up their vocabulary, right? So the strength is okay, yes, it's overwhelming to read this whole page, but let's just start with one word, right? And let's just go to the next word and let's go to the next word. And I think we can all take a lesson from that. Then we had Amy Grimm. And she talked about this idea of this sort of optimal stress, if you will, and it is the Yerkes Dotson curve. Hopefully, I said that right. And still have yet to look that up. I need to. And basically, it's a bell shaped curve. And I've definitely referenced it before. It's actually in my third book. I think it's in my second. I don't remember. That's terrible. But anyway, she talks about how the perception of stress is usually a bad thing. Oh, I'm stressed out and yada yada. But we need stress, right? We need some sort of force to kick us into gear. And not all stress is bad. And that was the kind of the depiction of the Yerkes Dotson curve is that with this bell-shaped curve, if you can find that optimal state, optimal level of stress, you're going to do your best work. Imagine this fits right into the flow channel, right? We talk a lot about, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's antecedents to flow. We have clear goals, challenge skills, ratio balanced, and then immediate feedback. And if you don't have enough challenge, you're going to be bored. There's not enough stress on the system to want to activate the skills within you. So we need that perfect level of stress. And then talk about stress with Brandon Lynette. She has, forget how many kids, 6+ kids with all the cats and dogs and everything else with, in her household. And her husband, does work. He's not always there throughout the week. He's got a job that travels. And she's got multiple podcasts. I was on her podcast, Listen Bitch. That was a fun time there. You can check out that episode. And it just makes me think, made me thought, still makes me think of this concept again of work-life balance. We talk about it on the show. You've heard me ask about, what people think in terms of that statement. And she breaks down, her and I resonate in the sense that work and life is sort of this blur. And I don't have, 6 kids and, a house full of cats and dogs and everything else and I guess I am running multiple podcasts, but it's about this idea that it goes back to who you are. How you do anything is how you do everything. That sort of concept that I learned from T. Harv Eker years and years ago from his Millionaire Mind Intensive, where he said, how you do anything is how you do everything. So how you do podcasting is how you're going to be a parent. How you treat your cat is how you're going to treat your daughter. And to apply this to your situation, don't be so quick to compartmentalize work and life. Yes, there's distinct times when, you have, okay, job starts at 9 and you end at 5, but don't say, okay, the work doesn't stop there, right? Remember Joe LaRussa, he talks about some of the more important work is actually in the home front as well. And I think Brandon really reminded me of that in terms of, yes, we can have a lot of different things. And the reason why we can do a lot of these different things is because we're being ourselves throughout all of them. And then Desi Bolin. So she had reached out to me on LinkedIn and asked me to be on her, podcast. And it was interesting because, sometimes I'm going to be honest, and maybe she's doing this, and no offense to Desi, because I get it. People are friending me on LinkedIn and they think that I'm a good candidate, right, for their marketing, funnel, and they want to get me into their program, and which I appreciate. And I guess it was a fun conversation in the sense that what sold me with her and why I wanted her to be on my show was that she said that, okay, if you're late, 1 minute late, we're done with this conversation. And what I loved is that it's accountability. And I imagine that, if we got into an accident, obviously something happened like that, she'd say, okay, well, life happens. But she reminded me throughout the conversation and our interactions, and that when we say, goes back to say what you do what you say. If you say you're going to show up at 5 o'clock, you're going to show up at 5 o'clock. And that's what needs to happen today. People are forgetting that we need to, again, show up for the things that we're saying. And one of the things, too, that Desi made me think about was that Catalyst Conversations, right? I remember asking her, on the show, kind of why, you know, you came up with that name. And we all have this sort of catalyst moment. And she likes talking to people. She likes hearing what they have to say. And she's a coach and she likes to guide them towards their goals and their dreams. And for me, what I realized is that I've had multiple catalysts. I still have multiple things that kind of kick me into gear, those good stresses sometimes. And my biggest one that really kind of started all of this work, it goes back again to that first book, The Impression of a Good Life, Finding Your Song and Dance, when I had these kind of catalyst moments where I got fired from a job. I, did not marry the woman I was dating. Everyone told me I had to marry. And, I dropped out of grad school. And you would think that, my life from societal standpoint was a complete shit show. And yeah, I wasn't following the traditional song and dance, but that was a catalyst. It was a conversation that happened with me and my world around me that made me see things the way they were. And it took me down this path where I'm at today. And the last thing, I think this is perfect because Paul Comfort talks about we're all trying to find like our purpose. It's like an X on a treasure map, right? We're trying to X marks the spot and we're trying to find and dig up the treasure that's buried within ourselves. And Paul Comfort's book, The X Factor, basically is the intersection of interests, abilities, experiences, and your purpose. And when you find that sweet spot, I remember taking his assessment, said I found mine, whatever that means. I guess I'm still trying to, not to say again, I guess my point with that is like I joke because yes, I know what I want, but at the same time, I don't know. So that's just an interesting work that I need to continue to do. But for those that are trying to ask the question of what is there meaning beyond the paycheck? Is there more to the work that I'm doing? And there is, right? I mean, Paul was an amazing guest because he has a 9 to 5. He also has a YouTube travel channel. He's a father and a husband. And he's the type of guest that I really love to have on the show because they break down this sort of imagery of that. Okay, I either have to be a person of 9 to 5 to be successful. I have to be the CEO or whatever. And, he was a CEO and president of these companies. But then other people say, well, no, I want to own my time and I want to be an entrepreneur. Well, he's also an entrepreneur, but the way he does that is he blends his love for talking about travel. I mean, that is just like, I talk about an X factor right there. And so that pretty much sums up July 2026. I just want to say that thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, success is not a matter of good luck, it's good skills. And I guess the skill that I've been thinking about today that I want to reflect on for July's guests is it really goes back to Shiloh Creed's storytelling. And I know I've mentioned it before in the past on different episodes in various ways. Storytelling is everything. The stories you tell yourself, the story you tell others. I think, again, writing it out is very critical. Get a pen and paper and just start journaling your thoughts. And I just go back to saying this because I'm finding more and more in the space of being online and in communities, people are having a hard time sitting with themselves. We have this feeling of going nowhere, right? This rush to go nowhere, if you will. And I think the way we're going to start combating that is to slow down. And before you get freaked out on why you need to slow down, remember that when you find stillness in your life and you slow down, it allows you to see how to find your way through the chaos. And with that, I'll see you next time. Thank you.